December 1979, Kabul. On the outskirts of the city, on top of a hill, stands the Taj Beg Palace. The lights are on. Security is reinforced. Inside, Hafizullah Amin, a man who, just months earlier, was considered an ally of Moscow. At 7:15 p.m., communications in the capital suddenly go silent. Minutes later, armored vehicles without insignia begin moving toward the palace. Inside them, Soviet Special Forces. The assault lasts 43 minutes. When it is over, Amin is dead. And over the radio, a pre-recorded message announces a new leader. The Soviet Union officially declares that its troops entered Afghanistan at the request of the Afghan government. But in reality, that government has just been overthrown. Moscow expected a short operation, a quick stabilization, the removal of an inconvenient leader, control restored. No one in the Kremlin planned for a 10-year war. No one expected that this decision would become one of the most expensive in Soviet history. In the coming years, hundreds of thousands of soldiers will pass through Afghanistan. Thousands will never return home. And the country they meant to stabilize will turn into a battlefield of endless war. But in December 1979, it looked different. It seemed like a manageable crisis, a correctable mistake, an operation that could be finished quickly. The question is not how the war began. The question is why Moscow believed it could control it. And to understand that, we need to go back 1 year earlier. To understand December 1979, we need to go back to April 1978. A military coup takes place in Kabul. The president is killed. Power is seized by the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, the PDPA, a Marxist party, oriented toward Moscow. But in a country where most of the population lives in villages, where tribal ties are stronger than state institutions, and Islam is not just a religion, but the foundation of social order, such a government feels alien. The problem was not only ideology, the problem was radicalism. The new leaders launch aggressive reforms, land redistribution, campaigns against religious figures, arrests, public executions. The reforms move fast, harshly, with little understanding of how Afghan society actually functions. Even inside the party, there is no unity. The PDPA is split into two factions, Khalq and Parcham. They hate each other almost as much as their political enemies. In 1979, the internal struggle reaches its peak. In September, Hafizullah Amin removes his ally and the country's leader, Nur Muhammad Taraki. Soon after, Taraki dies under mysterious circumstances. Moscow sees this as a personal betrayal. Amin becomes the sole ruler. He intensifies repression. Thousands are imprisoned. Across the country, uprisings ignite. By the spring of 1979, the central government is losing control over much of the countryside. Garrisons are surrounded. Officials flee. Rural provinces slip beyond Kabul's authority. Soviet advisors report back to Moscow. The regime is unstable. But the Kremlin's main problem is not only chaos. The main problem is Amin himself. He is not trusted in Moscow, unpredictable, ruthless, ambitious. KGB analysts begin to suspect, what if he is seeking contacts with the United States? There is no solid proof, only fear. And that fear grows within a shifting international landscape. In Iran, an Islamic revolution has just taken place. The region is destabilized. The southern borders of the Soviet Union suddenly look vulnerable. If Afghanistan slips out of Moscow's influence, it could create a new zone of instability right along the Soviet frontier. By the autumn of 1979, the picture is clear. An allied regime losing control, a leader under suspicion, a country sinking into rebellion, a region in turmoil. In the Kremlin, options are discussed. At first, limited assistance, advisors, equipment, support. But each month, the situation deteriorates, and gradually the question changes. Not, should we help? But, intervene directly or lose everything. By December, the decision is nearly formed. Only one step remains, and it will be taken very quickly. Moscow, late 1979. From the outside, the Soviet Union still looks like a superpower at the height of its influence, but inside the leadership, there is anxiety. Most of the information coming into the Kremlin about Afghanistan flows through one institution first, the KGB, which means the dominant voice in the room is Yuri Andropov. The reports are grim. Amin is unstable. Repression is intensifying. Uprisings are spreading. And there are suspicions of possible contacts with the West. There is no hard proof, but in the Cold War, fear often matters more than facts. Defense Minister Dmitry Ustinov supports the hard line. He is convinced that losing Afghanistan would open a breach in the Soviet Union's southern strategic belt. Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko sees the problem in geopolitical terms. If Moscow backs down, it sends a signal of weakness. And at the center of the system is Leonid Brezhnev, old, ill, tired. He argues less and relies more on the small circle around him. And it is this inner circle, Andropov, Ustinov, Gromyko, that shapes the consensus. The military does not see it the same way. Chief of the General Staff Nikolai Ogarkov warns openly, sending troops will lead to a long guerrilla war. A mountain country, a complex ethnic structure, tribal loyalties, religious mobilization. This is not Czechoslovakia in 1968. But the political leadership believes otherwise. In their minds, the operation will be limited. Remove Amin, install a more loyal leader, stabilize the situation, withdraw the troops. A few months, that's all. On December 12, 1979, the final decision is made. Without broad debate, without serious analysis of alternatives, without a long-term strategy. The decision is framed as a response to a request from the Afghan government for assistance. The paradox is obvious. That government is about to be replaced. The Kremlin acts on three assumptions. First, Afghanistan cannot be lost. Second, the operation will be quick. Third, the population will eventually accept the new leadership. All three assumptions will prove wrong, but in that moment, it feels rational. Inside the Kremlin, they do not say the word war. They say a limited contingent. They say international assistance. They say stabilization. 2 weeks later, an operation will begin that will change the course of Soviet history. And it will not begin with tanks. It will begin with the storming of a palace. December 27, 1979. Kabul moves through an ordinary evening. The streets are calm. No one knows the decision has already been made. Taj Beg Palace rises on a hill south of the city, massive, well fortified. Its guards, elite units, personally loyal to Hafizullah Amin. Hours before the assault, something strange happens inside the palace. Amin suddenly feels ill. He vomits. He grows weak. Later, it becomes clear. Poison had been mixed into his food. An agent embedded among the staff had carried out the order, but the plan falters. Soviet military doctors stationed at the palace, unaware of the conspiracy, save his life. History hesitates. At 7:15 p.m., Kabul's central communications hub goes dark. That is the signal. Armored vehicles begin moving toward the palace. Inside them, special forces units from the KGB and the GRU, groups Grom and Zenit, the so-called Muslim Battalion, airborne troops. They know the objective: eliminate Amin, seize key facilities, replace the regime. The assault unfolds rapidly. The guards resist fiercely. Fighting erupts in corridors, on staircases, in the palace halls. Gunfire at close range, room by room. 43 minutes later, it is over. Amin is dead. Members of his family are killed. Soviet officers are killed. The operation costs the lives of roughly 15 assault troops. Almost simultaneously, a pre-recorded address goes on the air. Babrak Karmal announces the salvation of the country from tyranny. The new leader effectively arrives alongside Soviet troops. The change of power is complete. In Moscow, they believe the key stage is finished, the regime replaced, the operation swift, resistance crushed. But beyond Kabul, the picture looks different. For much of Afghan society, this is not assistance, it is an invasion. The presence of foreign troops becomes a rallying point. What was designed as a surgical removal of one leader is perceived as occupation. And in that moment, on the night of December 27th to 28th, a limited operation turns into a war. Not formally declared, not fully calculated, but already irreversible. After the assault, events unfold quickly. The 40th Army enters Afghanistan. Columns of armored vehicles cross the border. Transport planes land in Kabul and Bagram. Formally, it is called a limited contingent. In practice, it is a full-scale military deployment. Soviet forces take control of key sites, government buildings, airfields, major cities, strategic roads. Kabul appears calm. In the first days, it seems the operation has succeeded. In Moscow, they speak of stabilization. But beyond the capital, the situation looks very different. Armed groups are already active in the provinces. Uprisings that began under Amin do not stop. Now they gain a new slogan: resistance against foreign troops. Afghan society does not function like the Soviet model. There is no centralized structure that can simply be captured and controlled. No single headquarters of resistance, no one leader to remove. There are tribes, religious authorities, local commanders. Each region lives by its own rules, and that becomes the problem. Soviet units can occupy a city, but beyond the garrison walls, another reality begins. Convoys on highways fall into ambushes. Patrols are fired upon from mountain ridges. Supply columns vanish along winding passes. The mountains become an ally of the resistance. By the spring of 1980, one fact is becoming clear. Control of Kabul does not mean control of Afghanistan. Up to 70 or even 80% of the territory remains outside direct government authority. Soviet officers report increasing insurgent activity, but in Moscow, the situation is still described as manageable. The official phrase does not change: providing international assistance. No one calls it a war. But the soldiers already know. This is not a temporary mission. It is a prolonged conflict in a country where every mountain pass can become a front line. The greatest danger is not the scale of the fighting. The greatest danger is the absence of a clear exit strategy. There was a plan for entering. There was no plan for leaving. And in these first months, it becomes clear. This is not an operation of a few weeks. It is a war that will demand more men, more resources, more time. And time is no longer on Moscow's side. When Soviet troops entered Afghanistan, resistance already existed. But it was fragmented. Different provinces, different leaders, different agendas. After December 1979, everything changes. The presence of a foreign army transforms scattered uprisings into a religiously charged resistance. The word jihad begins to echo more often. For many Afghans, this is no longer a struggle against a particular regime. It is a struggle against a foreign force on their land. And here, the defining feature of Afghanistan becomes clear. The resistance is not centralized. There is no single headquarters, no unified army, no supreme commander. There are dozens of field commanders. Each controls his own district, his own valley, his own mountain pass. One of the most prominent is Ahmad Shah Massoud. His base, the Panjshir Valley. He is more than a guerrilla fighter. He is an organizer. He builds a system of defense, supply, and local administration. Soviet forces will launch operation after operation against him, and none will deliver a decisive result. But Massoud is only one among many. The resistance does not resemble a conventional army. It is a network. And that is what makes it dangerous. The Soviet military is built on territorial control, holding lines, dominating from the air. The Mujahideen operate differently: ambushes, sudden strikes, disappearing into the mountains, relying on local support. They do not hold positions, they exhaust the enemy. By mid-1980, a pattern is emerging. Soviet forces control major cities and highways, but the countryside lives by its own rules. Each operation requires more troops. Each month increases the losses. And, most importantly, the resistance does not shrink, it grows. The intervention that was meant to stabilize the country has instead unified its opponents. Moscow expected loyalty. It received mobilization. And at this moment, the war ceases to be a local problem. It becomes part of a larger geopolitical contest, because beyond the Afghan mountains, Washington is watching closely. By early 1980, one thing is becoming clear. The situation is not stabilizing. The troops remain, operations continue, the resistance expands. In Moscow, they still speak of a temporary presence. But the facts tell a different story. The Soviet Union is already entangled. To withdraw immediately would mean admitting a mistake. To stay means continuing the war. The choice is made quietly. The contingent grows, bases are reinforced, planned combat operations begin. What started as a targeted intervention is turning into a systemic conflict. By 1980, the war is already irreversible. It is not officially declared, but it is being fought. And it is no longer about replacing a regime. It is a prolonged struggle in the mountains, in a country that cannot be controlled from its capital. The Soviet Union entered Afghanistan expecting a quick political result. Instead, it found itself in a war that would last nearly a decade. What was conceived as a limited mission has become a war with no easy exit. And this was only the beginning.